Now, look, let's talk about now. A big thing tonight has been I've been talking about the march of the left and the extreme left. All right, what people 20 years ago used to think were the lunatic, hairy armpit band in the in the humanities department. Well, those people have now made it into the bureaucracy. Those people have made it onto city council. Those people have made it to mayors on their way towards governors. And we've seen for 20 years people being relaxed and comfortable while institutions were being taken over literally and metaphorically, and a version of the world is now being built that people think that it is their holy work in a time where they don't believe in anything apart from their feelings and virtue signalling, to tear down a statue, to take over a police station. And that Chaz, that autonomous zone in Seattle, is to me a heartbreaking example of it, because literally socialist councillor says, how good's this? We should make it permanent. The mayor, who's a Democrat, says it'll be the summer of love. But could you imagine if a bunch of quote-unquote religious nutters decided to steal a part of a city?
Look, you know, when there isn't a backing of the police force by authorities, then you start to see lawlessness. And vigilantism is not new in the United States. I mean, it's been going on for a very long period of time. And it basically comes about right around the world, not just here in the US. It comes about when the people in authority aren't supporting the police to enforce the law. And when the people in authority say, look, on the one hand, you can break the law, but on the other hand, you shouldn't, then it confuses the public, and the public take law enforcement into their own hands. I mean, here in the US, there's a long history, as I said. I mean, Hollywood's made a lot of money about it. You know, you think of Batman and Robin or Superman. I mean, they were vigilantes, right? That was the whole myth that was created, even the Avengers. And now you're seeing almost a pass given to vigilante groups who are in themselves as bad as the worst protesters that are involving in criminal behaviour. And effectively, if you don't enforce the law, then others will. And look, Occupy movements aren't new, Paul. I mean, you know that. We had Occupy Wall Street. We had the Yellow Vest movement in France. I mean, we've got the Aboriginal Tent Embassy that's been there 50 years in Australia, in Canberra. So that's not new, but what is new is where there is a sign-off from authorities to say it's okay for us to lose control of part of our city. That's not on, and there'll be a heavy cost associated with that.
Yeah, now this Antifa group, right? Now these are the people who claim to be the physical warriors who'll take to the streets to take on, the evil racists. But of course, their tactics are just as brutal, I would argue more brutal, than some of the things they try to attack. And something that has changed, I think, in the past 5 years hasn't just been protests, but has been the counter-protest, that normally we would all agree, okay, look, one group of people is going to turn up on a Saturday, we'll turn up on a Sunday, or we'll do it the next week. Instead, what's happening now is that if you have one group, then there'll be another group that will confront. And largely that is this Antifa group that goes to confront. And they are there to cause as much trouble as possible. And they are spread out all over the country. Tell us a bit more about your thoughts of Antifa.
Well, originally Antifa was an anti-Nazi movement in Germany, and then it morphed into various other things. It has no leadership, it has no coordinating parties, but it is a movement that is trying to trade on the misery around the terrible killing of the young black man up in Minneapolis. So they're trading on divisions in American society, and they're not alone. I mean, there are some external forces that hate the United States that are also supporting some of the protest movements behind the scenes. Overall, though, I mean, most Americans want to see some change, and America is a nation that has been sorely divided by race issues, and I think it's just a challenging moment that we're going through. I mean, I was speaking to a 90-year-old gentleman who lived in Washington in the late 1960s, and he remembered armoured personnel carriers just outside the White House, pointing guns with military backing at down a street that didn't have anyone on it because they expected African Americans to come down that street to raid the White House. And he said it was far worse then than it is now. I think it will pass, provided there is some sensible responses from leaders here. But the challenge is at the moment, everyone's going to their corner in the lead up to the US election. Everyone's talking past each other. There's no common dialogue, and I think it's a structural challenge for the US that's still going to take many years to resolve.
Look, there are many things that I don't want to import from the US, but I love visiting about the US. But I tell you that freedom of speech written bang into the Constitution means that comedians can speak as freely as they do. It means you can speculate about, guilt or innocence of somebody when they're going before a court. You don't have to sort of, it's now been, even though everyone's got a clear view, someone's been charged, so we can't possibly talk about it. It means you can say the most positive or vile things, but you are protected in your ability to do so. And what we saw this past week with the New York Times was a disgrace. An elected senator writes an opinion piece that fully reasoned why troops may be needed, the National Guard, to put down not the protesters but the idiots that are looting and killing people. And by the way, 20 people have died in all of those things, but of course you won't hear about that on the 6 p.m. news. But they didn't just pull it, they sacked the bloke who approved it going into the paper. What does it say about this First Amendment that is so key to the American discourse that parts of the left are trying to deplatform, to silence even elected politicians?
I think it's crazy. I think it's crazy, whether it be the left or the right. When you deny someone who is an elected senator and a senior and influential senator, when you deny them a platform to make, a reasonable point, you might not agree with it, but you should give them the opportunity to be heard. After all, they are making the law. And frankly, I think it's a really poor reflection on the New York Times. But it's really hard to get unbiased information here. Australia still has a middle ground. I mean, you essentially know where people are coming from, and there is a sensible middle in Australia, and one of the reasons why that sensible middle really matters is because they have to vote at election time, whereas here in the US you've got to excite your base to get them out to vote, and you've got to fire them up, and of course part of the media is on one side, another part of the media is on the other side. But if you deny someone a voice, if you deny the debate, you're going to be poorer for it. And it's very frustrating. I mean, so what happens is, people are going to other sources. They're going to on cable TV here, you've got China government news, you've got Russian government news.
You do.
You've got Al Jazeera, you've got all these others, right? And, it's crazy. But to find out about some of the things that are not reported on mainstream media here, not to suck into their bias, but just to find out what's going on. You've got to consume so much news, and it's all filtered. So it's a very frustrating environment and a very hard environment to get unbiased news, and it's a shame. And I think the New York Times did itself a great disservice, Paul. And I hope we never see that in the Australian media.
Oh, well, probably will. But we'll do our best to fight it. Joe, thank you very much.
Well, let's hope we don't. Let's be optimistic. Let's be optimistic at this time of night.
All right.